Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Nicholas McKay, a first-year graduate student at Technical University Munich's Program of Responsibility in Science, Technology, and Society. This is our fourth episode of STS Shorts, a new video series from Eclectic Spacewalk, in which we dialogue with a researcher, lecturer, writer, and/or eclectic human in the science, technology, and society discipline or related fields. These shorts will only be around 30 minutes in length, and the goal is to highlight and hopefully introduce a new audience to our guests' research and work. Please grab a coffee, drink, and open your curious mind as we dive right in. So today we are pleased to be joined by Ashley Shew. Ashley is an assistant professor in the Department of Science, Technology, and Society at Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University in Blacksburg, Virginia. She is also the co-editor-in-chief of Techne, the official journal of the Society for Philosophy and Technology. Welcome to STS Shorts, Ashley.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicholas.
So can you give us a brief overview of your time before joining Virginia Tech, and how did you become interested in the STS field in the first place?
I became interested in STS when I was an undergraduate in the early 2000s, which will date me in particular ways. After working at Blockbuster Video, I was a student at University of South Carolina.
Nice name drop there.
Where I think of the last generation of Blockbuster employees there. I was an undergraduate at University of South Carolina in the United States, where at the time, social studies of nanoscience and nanotechnology were really big. And the philosophers at University of South Carolina brought in a large nanotechnology grant, like over $1 million, philosophers. And I was one of the students who got to be a research assistant through this program. Two of the, I still keep in touch with the other nano scholars, which makes us sound like tiny human beings. But I'm still in touch with a number of the people who I worked with then. I found out about STS. I was a philosophy student who got convinced that STS was an interesting direction to go. So I was still very much interested in philosophy, applied to philosophy programs, ended up coming to Virginia Tech as a graduate student. So I have my PhD in STS from Virginia Tech, as well as a master's in philosophy from Virginia Tech. People talk about the two ways to get jobs in our field is nepotism or luck. Nepotism was mine. I'm a spousal hire. And I was very lucky. My department wanted me, right? You don't have to take a spousal hire, and that they've treated me really well, which the sort of inferiority complex that you can have as a spousal hire also exists. And the chair at the time, Skip Furman, was really instrumental in making sure that I got what other new professors were getting, right? So startup and things like that, and really making sure that I took advantage of the resources that were shared with everyone else, but wouldn't have necessarily been shared with me as someone who was thought of as being there and knowing the lay of the land. It's very different as a faculty member than as a grad student. So I've been in my department in one way or another since 2005, but I've been a faculty member since 2011.
Nice. So very interesting that you kind of just stayed there. I mean, not just for the nepotism or whatever, but I know the only other one of your colleagues, Lee Vinsel, is kind of one of the more popular and active Twitter users with his podcast, People and Things and stuff. So he's always been interested in, and that's kind of how I found you as well. So it's been kind of interesting that you have a big department, but it's punching up,
Oh, and he's a lot of fun to be on a faculty with. He's a really good addition to our faculty, and we have some fun in that way.
That's awesome. So let's go into kind of you being Techne's co-editor-in-chief. So this is, again, the official journal of the Society of Philosophy and Technology, and quote, it is devoted to the philosophical analysis of technological systems and to reflections on the art, craft, science, and engineering of making things and getting things done in the world. And then additionally, the journal considers the nature and structure of technology, as well as its implications for human subjectivity, for the norms and values of society, and for the ecology of a peopled planet. So very much philosophical. I think that's an interesting kind of thing. You seem to have a background in that. Can you talk us about the journal, kind of being a co-editor in chief, and then just kind of like how that experience has gone?
Yeah, so I'm co-editor-in-chief with Kirk Besmer of Gonzaga University, and then our managing editor, who is the one who really keeps things moving along, is Michael Posnick. They are a great team to work with, and Robert Rosenberger is our current book review editor, so he comes to all of our editorial meetings too, and he was just elected the next president of the Society for Philosophy and Technology. So it's nice to have him part of our conversations, but it's an appointed position to be an editor of this journal. We are appointed by the board, and we have 4-year terms. So it's a little bit, the structural setups, different than journals that are independent of societies. And we have an editorial board that's really fantastic that we rely on for different suggestions about referees, because we can't know every area in philosophy and technology, since it's a wide open discipline in some ways. There's just so many different philosophical traditions that you can come in with, and so many different technological objects of study, and that'll perhaps appeal more to the STSers listening. But we, some of our work involves, pretty comprehensive case studies, but then sort of philosophical apparatus to analyze the case studies in different ways. That'll probably be the most familiar format to STSers. But then we have larger things that, maybe, I guess, more expansive things that reflect on the nature of technology. We're not, outside of our special issues, there's not one thing we're looking for. We're supposed to serve the Society of Philosophy and Technology. The board of the society still makes major decisions about publishers, and we serve at their will. So in so many ways, I feel like it's really hard to do philosophy of tech without knowing a good deal of STS at this point.
Interesting. So responsibility in science, technology, and society is kind of what drew me to TOMB and the emphasis on that. And I was just trying to kind of see that tension philosophically. You just mentioned that it's kind of an open field of philosophy and technology. Is there kind of not just one way to look at things, ethics, responsibility, epistemology? Like how do you kind of go about seeing things in an ethical light, or maybe it's not an ethical light in that sense, but more of a philosophical light?
Yeah, so there are more journals that are available if you work on tech ethics than if you work on, say, tech epistemology, right? So I feel like we end up getting more submissions sort of about phenomenology. Post-phenomenology, of course, is big in philosophy of technology, around sort of anthropological concerns. We do get ethical submissions, but I do feel like there are a lot more venues. I think about like IEEE, Technology and Society. ACM has their communications journal. There are some journal specific in STS that do a lot more ethical. I feel like people who work on ethics have more options in terms of publishing. Or if you're doing epistemology, phenomenology, metaphysics in the technology area, Techne is probably something you will be very interested in. But we do have competitors. It's been a growing field. There's I wouldn't even consider it's not a large enough field to be competitors, in a strong way. But there's the journal Technophony, and then the journal that's just called Philosophy and Technology that's published by Springer. So there's more that have arrived on the scene. Techne is one of the earliest ones, and it is the one associated with the society. So that makes it special to me.
A little bonding there. That's nice, and friendly competition, as you said. It's not too much of a field. One thing that comes. Oh, go ahead.
It's a field that's growing and getting crossover with other fields. So I feel like it's really good that we have more venues to publish in fact, because every year Techne gets we went over all the numbers 2 days ago, and we're getting more submissions each year. With the same editorial staff we used to have, and it's a harder time to get referees with the ongoing pandemic. Everyone is just fried. So at the same time, we're getting more papers in. Our reviewers are very tired. So I'm really glad that other journals exist in this field.
It's a good problem to have. There you go.
It is.
So one of the biggest kind of things that I saw from you was you wrote, I don't know if it's which you can process it as like, I guess, an article or a short piece, basically about the idea of technology and disability. So that's what I kind of familiarized myself with you. And the article was in Nature in May 2020. So right in the heart of the start of the pandemic of let COVID-19 expand our awareness of disability tech. And then the through line of that was that the pandemic's disruption shows how much academia could learn from the disability community. And, you kind of give some examples of how scholarly materials and teaching could be like more multimodal, and how that this has kind of been a lot of the things that the disability community had been asking for years. And then all of a sudden, a pandemic happens and we're doing this. So can you briefly, I guess, talk about, that article, but then also kind of the broader, I guess you could say, implications of kind of disability within technology and that kind of tension?
Yeah, my current research is all about the narratives disabled people tell about technology, right? Which is often very different than the stories we see outside of the disability community. Mm-hmm. So usually stories about disability technology in the news, in entertainment, like just shared images on social media of people using disability technologies, usually tell very particular stories about sort of disabled people spurring on creativity and design as the objects of design. Mm. But if you're someone who's using this technology, you're not experiencing it as an object, but you are the agent, making decisions, changing how your technology fits or how it looks, or you're searching for technologies that maybe don't exist yet because they're not aimed at the things you're interested in. So a lot of my work is reading what disabled people are writing and their stories about their lives. I'm paying attention to disability community storytelling more broadly. So I was given the opportunity to write in Nature. So it is not a peer-reviewed piece. It is, I guess, an opinion piece or an editorial or something along those lines. It's one page. It was really hard to write just one page as someone who would like to tell you all the stories and would like to share with you a long reference list. I was not trained for writing in one page. And I really appreciate the editors at Nature for doing some significant cutting on the page for me. But the article is about the ways in which disabled people have been using technologies for a much longer time that's really gone unappreciated. Disabled people often have to hack around existing infrastructure to get what they need, to get the same access everyone else has, whether it's figuring out how to, rough together captions or get a captionist on the scene. We have all of these auto-generated captions in Zoom now. That wasn't standard on Zoom in 2020, although it was on Google Meet. If you want to rank your large technology companies, we don't have to today. There's also other different software I have on my phone, Otter AI, which I can get essentially captions, which I really like because then I can look at the transcript later and correct it because, of course, the transcription isn't great. And there are other programs like this, too, that a lot of people didn't know about, which disabled people have been using, and also just sort of the network of captionists and interpreters that maybe we've had to book before, but no one has considered, but also just using technologies in creative ways for those of us who have spent long stints in the hospital or who have had to be homebound for various reasons of chronic illness. like these technologies are normalized in our social lives far more than they were, at least in early 2020, for the non-disabled population. And there are all these sorts of things that disabled people have been clamoring for, especially when it comes to like distance education, right? If you can't access a space because of physical barriers, or because of pain in your own body, or because you get migraines with all the flickering fluorescent lights in a classroom, having access to classes, not just classes. So I think in higher ed, we really need to be thinking about how to keep a lot of the things we've been trying out and incorporate them in really maybe in better ways, because sometimes people are adopting these technologies and it's for emergency use, right? So they're not using it in ways that are trained, helpful, good, or like the best, right? So,
Right.
I'm really worried now everyone wants to go back to normal, but what that means is yanking back access from a lot of people, right? That we know is now possible. And
right.
it feels really gross. But there's also, it's not just higher ed. Like, I live far enough out of town, which is not very far out of town here, where I could never get delivery of any type of food before. All the new platforms.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm looking out at a field right now.
I'm from Tennessee originally, so I get it.
I mean, I'm in a neighborhood, but it's also like it's outside the town limits. I couldn't get delivery of anything. I can now get groceries delivered. My pharmacy will deliver drugs. I mean, the pharmacies have been, especially independent pharmacies, have been better at this for a long time because of who they serve, right? Compounding pharmacies that do this sort of work. But I can get food. I can get drugs. I can get things that I would have had to make myself uncomfortable to get in some cases. There's also, in a car basis to the United States, I can drive up and people will put groceries in my trunk. And I started, we had one of our grocery stores, only one of them would do that before the pandemic. And after I had lung surgery a few years ago, one of my friends told me about Drive Up, and I could go online, I could pick out all my groceries, I could have someone put them in my trunk, I could drive home, and then I could get my 10-year-old to unload the car for me because I couldn't lift anything once they've cut through torso, to do lung surgery, right? So I'm lifting things, and I actually ended up, back in the ER because a month out, I tried to lift a laundry basket. And I hurt myself really bad, and I was in a lot of pain for a couple of weeks, just from trying to do that basic chore. But I had been using the grocery pickup, prior. It was a good solution to a problem for someone who couldn't either lift or walk through a grocery store, right? When it comes to selecting food and whatnot. So I think about that. I also think about the theater experiences. So accessing theaters can be really difficult too. And so many live concerts ended up moving towards streaming platforms, where, Hamilton was already headed this direction, but they recorded Hamilton, they put captions on it, good captions. I think about the experience of watching Hamilton at home with captions, of course, isn't the same as the theater experience, but for a lot of theater, it's completely inaccessible to, pretty large segments of the population when we talk about how many people are disabled, right? And you can pause it, right? If you're not someone who can sit for 3 hours in one space, because that is itself a skill. I actually find it, my kids are really into theater. When I go to theaters, it's taxing on my body. Like, I wear a prosthesis, and my prosthesis is really great for walking and sitting for long periods of time with my body in this thing and my legs not quite symmetrical. Like, I can end up messing up my back just because I'm holding myself in weird ways, and then I have to keep moving around to straighten out my leg, and depending on how much space there is between seats, sitting for 3 hours is hard, right? And,
Right.
and you don't think about that, right? Like when you design a lot of these experiences. So the sort of like arts and music that are accessible now, and I realize that these are all privileged positions to be in. I think about also the different types of social services that have been shifted. I think about how food distribution has been shifted with Drive Up, as more people have needed that sort of thing. And of course, like pharmacies delivering matters a lot during a pandemic if you don't want to go stand in line at a pharmacy, right? Because that is dangerous to you during a pandemic. Although standing in line in some of these pharmacies was always difficult because they don't provide seating in a lot of cases, and they should. So there's like so many things where disabled people have asked for these things, been denied them. Work from home is another one of those things.
Totally.
When we now know they were always possible. And there's like bitterness in that.
Can imagine.
Right, like we were told that this was impossible, and as soon as it affected non-disabled people, things shifted. It wasn't enough that we needed it.
Right. And so it's not just thinking about access. It's not just thinking about design. And that's maybe like looking backwards, but then looking forwards. One of the things that you kind of have written about is Technoableism. And kind of when we talk about, possible futures with artificial intelligence, space travel, this kind of stuff, it really needs to be on the forefront, or at least very much considered in a lot of different ways. You wrote a piece, Technoableism, Cyborg Bodies, and Mars. So, quote, cyborg bodies aren't these shining examples of human overcoming and technological triumph. I use stuff because I need it, and sometimes I even like it. But ideas about cyborgs usually gloss over what it is actually like. So you kind of touched on that a little bit with your prosthesis and some of the stuff, but can you kind of explain a little bit more about kind of the idea of technoableism and then how it kind of comes out or rises to the top when we start thinking of futures of, going to Mars and cyborg bodies and artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so there's sort of two things in this. Well, the first is about technoableism itself. So ableism is, of course, bias against disabled people, but also in favor of non-disabled norms, life, living. Some of these are aesthetic, but also in terms of like who we prefer, who we seek out. These sorts of value judgments that are made implicitly in a lot of cases. And technoableism is just ableism that's reified through technology. Often disabled people are told that technologies are supposed to fix, cure, save us, make us palatable for other people. So I have amputee friends. I like to go to amputee coalition meetings. And I remember one of my friends, he's missing part of his leg. He's an above the knee amputee. And he was telling us about being out at the grocery store in his small town in a scooter. He had broken his wrist, so he couldn't use crutches. And he hadn't gotten a prosthetic leg yet. And he was using a mobility scooter because, of course, if you've broken a wrist using a wheelchair, a manual one, is really hard. He's using a mobility scooter. He is, with his daughter, and he's picking out vegetables or something exciting like that. And he has people come up to him and ask him why he's not wearing his prosthesis, and telling him that it's really inappropriate that he's out in public without a leg on.
Oh, man.
The sort of expectation in his small town around his body was that if he was going to show up in public, he needed to wear the appropriate technology, and that he was being inappropriate for being out in public. And this is just one story. I feel like a lot of us encounter, especially those of us with visible disabilities or apparent disabilities, that people have in mind what they want us to look like. Yeah. I'm an amputee, so often they really want to see people on running legs being sportsy. Our dominant image of amputees is here's how it goes. And I really I really want more ways of being okay in the world for us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? That we could make lots of different types of technological choices. I'm really, I'm fired up when Mallory K. Nelson talks about transmobility, where she explains that amputees actually have a wider range of mobilities than non-disabled people. We could choose crutches. This is for like amputees. We could choose crutches. We could choose wheelchairs. We could choose one of those like little leg things that looks like a crutch, but then it's like bolted to your leg. We could use prosthetic limbs. The prosthetic limbs don't have to look like limbs. We could imagine other ways of being. Like, there's just so many options for us.
Right.
And most people don't. Most people have in mind that what every amputee wants is a good prosthetic leg that has like mystical properties, so that it becomes your leg and it's like an extension of your body. And even if occasionally my prosthetic is an extension of my body, like, it's gonna break. Things are gonna go askew. My liners are gonna rip. My shell is gonna like wear through. Like, it's, even if temporarily it feels like an extension of my body, it will quickly stop, and abruptly at times when things are broken or need maintenance. And here's where you can speak to Lee Vinsel's work, right? The area of technological maintenance, and our PhD student who's now graduated, Josh Earl, talks about this as cyborg maintenance, right? Like, it's not going to be the fluid imagination that we have about prosthetics, where there's not just replacement, but it feels like real. For most of us, that's like, it might be that way occasionally. Right. but often it isn't, and getting it to the point where it feels like that is also like, it consumes time and energy, and not everyone wants to pursue that, right? So I have friends who, particularly high-level amputees, who wearing a prosthesis means like wearing like a waist belt, and like they call it a bucket socket for when you don't have like a lot of limb to hang your socket on. And it's uncomfortable, and it hits them in the groin, and it's up in uncomfortable places. People with more limb to hang things off of often do better in terms of prosthetic fit, but the sort of wear and tear of a lot of the soft tissues that you would have like on your hip and on your like upper leg, the wear and tear there, can be terrible in some cases. And people get sores and the sort of so some of them decide not to use prostheses. Right. And I feel like that should be a valid choice for them. And they know it. They know what they're encountering, and it's hard to see continued narratives that tell them that to be good enough, they need particular technologies. Right? That's technoableism. Right? That to be good enough, to be present, to be considered a good disabled person, a good amputee in this case. But I feel like this exists for all, like a wide variety of types of disability. I'm speaking from my experience here, but I read much more broadly than that. And I think about, how ABA therapy for autistic people tries to normalize their behavior, but at the expense of their mental health. So many autistic advocates and activists speak up against ABA therapy because it's coercive. It was designed by the same guy who does gay conversion therapy, for instance. ABA, So there are all these conversations where this type of approach is actually really problematic. Totally. But it's because it assumes that there's like one good way to be in the world. And that's so much of the conversation around technoableism. You need this technology to be normalized to the point where you're worthy of being included. This is what Tanya Tichkowski calls, is it includability? I'm going to butcher it. But it's about making our bodies or our body minds or our behavior shaped into ways that non-disabled deem appropriate. And so we're allowed to be, say, included in educational environments or included in workplaces or included just in public life.
And then,
so the second part of what you were talking about is space stuff, and I can pivot there if you want.
No, I mean, we're coming up on 30 minutes. So like, I'll ask you one more question, and I'll obviously link all these, kind of your pieces in a thread, and then also the description. But one thing I did want to ask you, because I'm particularly interested in this, is like storytelling and the aspects of that. And then obviously on your, you hosted on one time on We Are Disabled, the Twitter account. And I thought that was interesting, but then also the hashtag Crips in Space, which was super interesting. So like, is a lot of this kind of, or at least maybe we can just talk about me, but shortly, how does like storytelling, kind of come into this? How do, not just getting the word out per se, but then allowing and the opportunity to tell these stories, I think is a huge kind of opportunity, I guess you could say, for getting some of these stories out, and then not just like denormalizing this kind of behavior towards disabled people and stuff. So how do you think about kind of storytelling if we were to, kind of sum up this conversation in kind of technology, disability, technoableism, et cetera?
I'll answer you with reference to space. So I think about how so many of our stories point us in the direction of the future. And I think disabled storytelling is really important to give us more accurate futures. A thing we know,
great point,
but we don't talk about a lot is the future is going to contain a lot of disabled people. Whether we go to space, right? In space, no one grew up in that environmental niche, and effectively we are all disabled because that is not, it's a hostile environment. And if we come back, we'll be disabled when we think about like what we know from people who have been to space and how it changes your eyeballs and your bones, some pretty important things in your body.
For sure.
Like people will experience disability if they spend any time in space. And we need to start thinking about that, but also with climate change, and I was saying this before the pandemic, with new viruses and new diseases, we will experience new types of disabled people. I think, I was always thinking about post-polio syndrome. I was thinking about shingles in relationship to chicken pox before the pandemic, but perhaps this seems more relevant in our acute moment. Like what we can expect and what we're seeing with long COVID too is that more disabled people will be in the world. So planning for a world in which disability is normalized is an important imperative. And I see stories particularly, so Sami Schock has written a whole bunch about Afrofuturism and disability, and sort of how Afrofuturism is getting disability right and in more complex ways than a lot of writing about disability does. I think about the Deaf Poets Society had this issue of Crips in Space, which was all disabled writers writing about space. And some of it was about how they've always been told that they could, like every other child gets told, you could be anything you want, even an astronaut. And they were never told that, right? Like what we expect of disabled people is also shaped by ableism in so many ways. Yeah, I'm excited, and I think this work around technology and disability relates strongly to sort of STS projects about the future, about responsible innovation, that's a popular term, about anticipatory governance, another popular term. But I think all of it plays into the futures we can expect and that we should be anticipating.
Yeah, that's well said, because there are a lot of stories that, could be not just advantageous, but then also, very interesting, because I obviously I've thought about that at some level because of me being a space nerd and, want to be astronaut and stuff. But yeah, that's super interesting to start thinking of like what the future entails. It's not just about space or COVID or other things like that. Like there is going to be a kind of monumental shift in our thinking, or hopefully. And that's it. Very interesting too with Afrofuturism. I'd love to see that piece. So maybe you can send me that.
Oh yeah,
I can link that.
Sami Schock's book Body Minds Reimagined.
Okay.
But I know she has another one coming out like next year from Duke University Press, but I forget what the name is. So I'm waiting for that one to drop
as well in anticipation.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for coming on, and I really appreciate it. So again, Ashley Shew, thank you so much for coming on STS Shorts.
Thanks so much, Nicholas.